To do is to welcome everyone. It feels like a long time since we were last together, and to all of our Jewish participants, Shana Tova, a sweet year, and please God, a better year for each and every one of us around the world. And I hope all of you are managing okay during these sadly continuing difficult times. So as I said, it's been a while since we met, and since then I've been to another cottage, which I love because cottages are the best place to read, whether you're inside or outside. So I've done a lot of good reading and good thinking about reading. Since I was last with you, I think we have had quite a few new members join us. So all of you who are brand new to good books, welcome. We are happy to have you here. And please do, if you enjoy what you see, tell your friends. Everyone is welcome to join us. But just a reminder about what Good Books is. It's not a book club. It's pretty simple. It's just me talking about what I've read since we were last together, a little bit of a description about the book, and then an opportunity for those of you to pick a book that you've read lately that you would like to recommend to others, and just a sentence about it, please, so that there's time for everyone. Because when we started, the point of this was that it was something very short, just a little break in your day, about 15 minutes. I have to admit that it has gone longer sometimes, and probably will go longer today since it's been such a long time since I've seen you. We'll be back to our every second Tuesday schedule again, which is great. October 13th will be our next one. And I'd like to once again thank our host, Holy Blossom Temple, and Naomi for being our assistant during these sessions and making sure everything runs smoothly. Speaking of Holy Blossom, a reminder of our Holy Blossom class, which begins on October 8th. That's Thursday, at 10:30 a.m. to approximately 12. We, unlike being in person, we won't really stick to a time. It probably will go a little bit shorter. The class is contemporary Jewish fiction, and everyone is welcome, but you do have to register with Holy Blossom. There's a fee for Holy Blossom members. It's lower than for others, but again, I said everyone, as I said, everyone's welcome. And in that situation, I am welcoming and hoping for your very active participation, questions, and commentary as we go through the books that we will discuss. We'll discuss 3 books over 4 weeks, which is why we try to give an hour and a half each day. The first novel that we'll be looking at in that class, we will be discussing today as well. It's called Lears Shadow, and it's based on Shakespeare's King Lear. So those of you who will be joining me for Holy Blossom class, if you can, and you have the desire and the time, read King Lear, and I'll be talking about that too. But the first book that I'm going to tell you about today is really because I want to introduce you to a writer you may not be aware of. And her name is Penelope Fitzgerald, and the book is The Golden Child. A reminder that I'll send out to everybody the book list afterwards. And so that you don't have to write everything down. I just like to show you the cover if I have it. So Penelope Fitzgerald, an amazing writer. This first novel of hers, The Golden Child, is much lighter than her later books, which I will discuss a little bit later on. But this book is really fun. It's an inside look at a museum and all of the politics, ambition, and creative decisions and murder that surround that museum's greatest exhibit. So it's a fictional museum, but it is based on the very memorable and famous King Tut exhibit, which opened at the British Museum in 1972. And I was fortunate enough to be in London at that time. And I was part of those long lines at the British Museum to see that exhibit. So it's a fun book. It's fascinating about what might happen behind the scenes at a museum. Penelope Fitzgerald's mother was one of the first women students at Oxford, and Fitzgerald herself graduated from there as well with a first. She called on her knowledge of British history, which she studied, for her final and most famous novels. Penelope Fitzgerald burst on the scene in 1979 when her novel Offshore won the Booker Prize. It was a surprise winner. She was 63 and had only started publishing 3 years earlier. So there's hope for all of us. Her first novel was The Golden Child, and it was written to amuse her husband, who was ill and died in 1976. After that first book, in the ensuing 20 years, she published 9 novels, 3 biographies, and many reviews and essays. She used the experiences and the jobs from her real life. She worked at the BBC during the Blitz, and she ran a bookshop as well. And do read her novel, The Bookshop, which includes a pivotal event that happened at the store she was working in, and that was the decision to stock the novel Lolita, which, as you know, was a real cause célèbre at the time. There is a 2017 film of The Bookshop starring Emily Mortimer, which you would also find great fun to see. Fitzgerald also lived on a barge on the Thames, and she taught at a drama school where her pupils included Camilla Shand, later Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall. She also taught at a posh crammer, as she calls it, like a fancy private school, where her pupils included Anna Wintour, Edward St. Aubain, and Helena Bonham Carter. In fact, she continued to teach until she was 70 years old. At age 80, she published her absolutely stunning novel, and I deeply recommend it, The Blue Flower. It won the National Book Critics Circle Award, and The Observer called it one of the 10 greatest historical novels. She died in 2000 at 83, and because of her very quiet presence, she might have disappeared. But a biography of her life by Hermione Lee and the devotion of her executors and her publishers have kept her in print till now. The London Times listed her as among the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. It says this in the introduction to my edition of The Golden Child. She was a novelist with a passionate following of careful readers, not a big name. She wrote compact, subtle novels. They are funny, but they are also dark. They are eloquent and clear, but also elusive and indirect. They leave a great deal unsaid. So I'm not sure how it happened that my reading has been so Shakespearean lately. One thing has led to another, and I'm delighted. I had just completed Hamnet and Judith, which I talked to you about, when a dear friend from Penguin Random House sent me Shadow Play by Joseph O'Connor. It's 1878, the Lyceum Theatre in London. 3 extraordinary people begin their life together. Henry Irving, the chief and the owner of the theater, is the volcanic leading man and impresario. Ellen Terry is the most lauded and desired actress of her generation, outspoken and generous. And ever following along behind them in the shadows is the unremarkable theater manager, Bram Stoker. Fresh from life in Dublin as a clerk, Stoker may seem the least colorful of the trio, but he is wrestling with dark demons in a new city, in a new marriage, and with his own literary aspirations. As he walks the London streets at night, streets haunted by the Ripper and the gossip which swirls around his friend Oscar Wilde, he finds his inspiration. Well, this was definitely my kind of book, as my friend knew, combining a lot of Gothic and a lot of theater. Remember I told you about the novel quite a while ago, The Actress, and how much I enjoyed the theater lore in that. And then we had another taste of theater and theater history, though it wasn't the center of the novel, in Hamnet and Judith. This book is chock full of theater and theater people in all their roles, responsibilities, and positions. A brilliant review of Shadow Play in The Observer says, there is much discussion of the self and identity in Shadow Play. Good selves, shadow selves, hidden selves, Jekyll and Hyde selves. Sexuality and gender are shape-shifting, and there could be no better place to explore them than O'Connor's vagabond world of theater, where his characters may throw off their disguises amid the play acting. Inventions and discoveries are everywhere throughout this novel. Stage lighting and explosions and the invention of the typewriter. And all the time, Count Dracula is waiting in the wings, waiting. Or we are waiting for him. We know what Stoker will write. Stoker's immortal work grows in his subconscious, and the clues and that archetypal novel evolve and revolve in Stoker's imagination. At their first meeting, Irving says to Stoker, "I don't bite." And there is a theory that Henry Irving's tempestuous and difficult nature was part of Stoker's inspiration for Dracula's character. A Jonathan Harker comes to work at the theater. A ghost named Mina haunts the dilapidated Lyceum at night. There is a book on theatrical effects by an Edward Helsing, and a man in a lunatic asylum eats insects in his cell. The pieces of the jigsaw gather, and it is a relief to us when Stoker finally begins to write. And let me encourage you to read Dracula. If you have never read it or not for a long time, it may surprise you. There's so much going on in that book. And here's a fascinating fact. At that time in England, there was no such thing as copyright on novels. And this very much upset Bram Stoker's wife, who discovered that his early books were all being pirated. The only way to get copyright was to have your book performed as a play. So Dracula was first experienced as drama, and then it had copyright. It was the first of Stoker's books to have that copyright. It's also full of humor. Ellen Terry always supported Stoker's darker writings and admired Dracula as soon as it was published. In a letter to Stoker, she pretended to be the Count, and she says, "I will have you know, sir, that being a vampire is not easy. The hours are unsociable, the clothes are old-fashioned, opportunities to meet girls are limited." This is a surprising novel of friendship, marital love, creativity, and darkness and light, and about uncovering the truths about oneself. The author, Joseph O'Connor, was born in Dublin and is the author of 9 novels. He's won many awards, and his work has been translated into 40 languages. He is the Frank McCourt Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Limerick. Shadow Play was a finalist for the following awards: the Costa Book of the Year, the Dalkey Literary Award, and the 2020 Walter Scott Prize. Colin McCann, who we know as the author of Opyragon, said, "The book is funny, smart, tender, and wise." The Washington Post said, "Joseph O'Connor's magnificent novel does even more than fly, it soars." And finally, I'll tell you what the 2-time Booker Award-winning novelist Peter Carey had to say. There are few living writers who can take us back in time so assuredly through such gorgeous sentences. Joseph O'Connor is a wonder, and Shadow Play is a triumph. Now, as E.M. Forster said, everything connects. Shadow Play connected me back with Hamnet, and there's a production of Hamlet described in Shadow Play with Henry Irving in the lead. So the next book I picked up was King Lear. That is Shakespeare's Lear, to prepare me for classes and book clubs about the novel Lear's Shadow. I opened my edition of King Lear to find a dramatic frontispiece. Let me show you. I hope you can see this. Okay, here's what that is. Henry Irving is in one of his most spectacular productions at the Lyceum, 1892. The settings designed by the pre-Raphaelite painter Ford Madox Brown were archaeologically accurate scenes of early Britain, and complex stage machinery and lighting effects were employed throughout. So having just read Shadow Play, my next book that I opened had Henry Irving and discusses the interesting theatrical effects. I'm going to comment first briefly on my experience of reading King Lear. So I was at a cottage and I had quiet time, and I hadn't read Shakespeare in more than 30 years. And that was partly because, having been to productions of Shakespeare at Stratford, I had grown a bit weary of Shakespeare. It just seemed too long and too heavy to me. Maybe I'll go back, because reading King Lear was just amazing. So familiar, and the language so gorgeous. The repeated imagery, the depth of emotion, the range of characters, and actually the ease of reading the Elizabethan English. It all delighted me. But mostly, and this is connected with the next book I'll talk to you about, I rediscovered that this is a domestic drama about families and their loves and their strife. There are two fathers depicted, both deluded about which of their offspring to trust. We see relations between sisters and between brothers strained to death. So let me move on now to Lear's Shadow. And we will be talking about this book in much greater depth for those of you who join me in the Canadian Jewish fiction class coming up. Lear's Shadow won the Vine Award for the best Canadian Jewish fiction last year. And it's the story of the Rose family, formerly the Rosenberg family, and specifically focusing on daughter B. There are two sisters, B and Kara, and they're left without their mother. She dies in a car accident, and the car was driven by their father, Saul, and that plays an important part in the novel. Kara owns a raw food restaurant with her husband, and B, the center of the novel, finds herself at this time in her life at loose ends. She takes a summer job with an outdoor production of King Lear, and the book again offers wonderful insights into the theater world. The aging star Phil appears to be sort of losing it, and B becomes his keeper. Meanwhile, her father Saul's behavior has become increasingly erratic, and on a stormy night, he becomes disoriented and ends up in hospital. He is ultimately diagnosed with dementia with Lewy bodies, a particularly aggressive and even violent form of dementia. As the novel progresses, both Phil and Saul deteriorate in their ways. Saul rightly believes that Kara's husband is having an affair with his chef, and at a restaurant event, he goes on the attack. But in his confusion, he stabs Bee in the chest, severely wounding her lungs. Bee slowly recovers and is able to watch the final performance of Lear. She is reunited with a childhood boyfriend, but Saul is in a psychiatric hospital, non-responsive. The parallels with King Lear are throughout, in imagery, in the characters, and in the relationships. But even without that deep resonance, this is a terrific novel. And for those of you who are from Montreal, you will love the Montreal setting. But it's a book about dementia as well, something that many of us sadly know too much about. It's about families and the way they work, the way they come together, and the way they fall apart. And it's about theater. Claire Rothman Holden, the author, is a Montrealer who did take a summer job in a theater production of Macbeth. This is her third novel. The Heart Specialist, her first, was longlisted for the Scotia Giller Prize, and her second, My October, was longlisted for the same prize and shortlisted for the Governor General's Award. The novel plays with concepts of identity and disguise, while realistically showing us the struggles of sisters dealing with the devastating effects of dementia on their father. Sean Michaels, the Scotiabank Giller Prize-winning author of Us Conductors, says, "Love like a shadow flies," wrote Shakespeare, and this is a story of love in its shifting shades, desire, duty, and fellowship of theater, rendered into often tender, clear-eyed stories. Karina Onstad, author of Everybody Has Everything, says, "A delicately wrought, heartfelt novel about the injuries we carry in mind and body, and the power of art to heal us all." Okay, I see that it's 5 minutes to 11 here. And so I think I'll keep my next book until next time to give all of you a moment to talk. So if any of you want to chat, please tell us about a book briefly and unmute yourself and put up a hand, and I will eventually see you. Okay, I see Alice. Alice, unmute yourself.
I have 2 books. One, I just finished Alana Ferrante's new book, The Lyme Life of Adults, and I did enjoy it. It's about an adolescent girl, and it has the usual amount of unpleasant characters, but it was interesting. And the other recommendation I have is a book by an author from Ghana. It's a mystery. His name is Kwei Quarty, and it's the Missing American, and it's about the internet scams that come out of Ghana and some other countries, and that was quite interesting.
Thank you. I've just ordered the Ferrante, so I look forward to reading it, but a Ghanaian mystery, that's great. Okay, Anne Dublin, unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just started reading this book, but I can't put it down, so I want to tell you about it. It's called They Went Left, and it's by Monica Hess. I hope you can all see that.
Yep.
What intrigues me is it's a story, a historical novel, that takes place, it begins in 1945. Let me just read a very fast bit. Germany, 1945. The soldiers who liberated the Gross-Rosen concentration camp said the war was over, but nothing feels over to 18-year-old Sophia Letterman. It traces her journey and her quest to be reunited with her younger brother. They were separated when they arrived at Birkenau, Auschwitz 3 years previously. And you know how sometimes a book just shocks you and surprises you? Well, what I didn't know was the first part of the book traces her journey to the city in Poland called Sosnowiec, where she originally came from. And that happens to be where my parents came from and were married. And I didn't expect that at all. And I've been there, I've walked in that city. And so when she describes the smells and the sights, you know, post-war, it just was like, it went right to my heart. Anyway, as I say, I've just begun reading it. It was published in this year, 2020. I'll be reviewing it for the Association of Jewish Libraries, but I can't put it down. It's not just the story, it's the language and the setting. The language is gorgeous. The author is a columnist for the Washington Post. She's written a few novels previous to this, some of which have won awards. So I highly recommend it. Monica Hess.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mimi.
Hi, Cynthia. I mentioned this book when you did your study session at Holy Blossom on Rosh Hashanah, but I want to mention it for everyone here. It's by Schrobsdorf, Schrobsdorff, and it's a memoir, You Are Not Like Other Mothers. It's a fascinating history of Germany from before World War I up until, I guess, the present day, but she's a fascinating woman. And her last husband was Claudia Lanzmann, who did the Shoah film. It's a marvelous, marvelous book. The Toronto Public Library has it, and I highly recommend it. And there's a book that the New York Times loved 2 years ago, I guess. It's called Hotel Neversink. And this is for you, Cynthia. It's a mystery story, but it's wonderful because it takes place in the Catskills. And it is the most marvelous, marvelous story. And the author is Price, Price.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to look that up right away. Thanks.
Also, if you want another mystery, Norwegian by Night.
Oh, no, I did Norwegian by Night in my class a couple of years ago. Yeah. Love that one.
Derek Miller.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Ruth Ehrlich, what would you like to tell us about? Please unmute yourself, Ruth. We still can't hear you. Naomi, do you have to unmute Ruth? Ruth, you are still muted. Or maybe there's something wrong with your sound, Ruth. I'm really sorry. We can't hear you. It looks like you're unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Keep your idea for next time, okay? All right, thank you. Anyone else here? I'm going to go on to my next screen now. And anybody else here who wants to contribute a thought? Carolyn, is that just a finger going up or no? Okay. And now onto my final screen. Anybody here? Madeline, Matt, oh my goodness, hello, I didn't see you before. It's great to see you. Anybody else here? Okay, I think we have all of our questions and comments. If there is someone I have missed, just unmute yourself now and speak up.
You missed Susan Baskin.
Susan, dear Susan, go ahead now.
Thank you, Cynthia. Well, I read the first 2 books in the Hilary Mantel trilogy about Cromwell this summer. Talk about beautiful language. At first, I wasn't so keen that I was interested in Cromwell, blah, 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 a lot of death. Just the most beautiful writing I've read in a long, long time. They're very big books, but you know, if you don't think you're interested in British history, Hilary Mantel makes Cromwell such an engaging character. And you learn a lot about the time, about navigating politics, and a great deal of it is really relevant to what seems to be going on in the United States today in some ways. That I felt there was a parallel. And I also read, I know many of you have read it, The Weight of Ink, which I enjoyed very much.
Thank you, Susan. If there's anybody else who I didn't see with your hand up, please shout out now. Okay, well, that's it for Good Books number 11. I will send the reading list out to you. But before I go, let's face it, we are in the second wave of the pandemic, and things are likely to get a little worse before they get better. With the cold weather coming and the darker months ahead, we need our comforts. On CBC this morning, they suggested watching Golden Girls, but I, of course, suggest, sure, do that, but reading. But I thought, you know, first of all, Good Books will continue. I'll be here with you every second Tuesday, and it means a lot to me, and it means a lot to me to have so many of you with us. But let me send out a little bit of a reading challenge for these times. Over the winter, in addition to your regular reading, challenge yourself to something a bit unusual in your reading. And I'm going to suggest 3 things. 1, a classic. So you'll recall that I read Dickens and now I've read Lear. It's really good to go back to the classics. If you can't think of what to go to, let me suggest Jane Austen. You will be taken to another world. You will live in Jane Austen, and it's a glorious and wonderful experience to go back to Jane Austen. But any classic, go back to a classic. She's so diverting, Jane Austen. Try a different genre. If you're the person who said, but I don't like mysteries, I hope maybe I've changed some of your minds, but try a mystery. For me, I don't usually read science fiction or speculative fiction, or maybe some of you don't read fantasy, that kind of a category. Try one of those. And finally, try a book by a Canadian Indigenous writer. So that's my challenge to you. And as you do read those books, we will want to hear about them. See you in 2 weeks. Until then, be well, be happy in your reading. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.